What is
And
up?
welcome back to ADHD Explorers. I'm Addy, and this is Ben.
Hello.
And we are here as part of the ADHDers community. So we are a community of people with ADHD, and we just are trying to figure out our ADHD and provide as many resources as we can so that we can kick butt with ADHD. And the way that we're doing that on this episode is we are getting therapized. So we're talking therapy, baby,
Oh
and
yeah.
how to get it. Well, at least our experiences of how we got it, what we found to be good in therapy, and what we know to be, beneficial about therapy and how it helps your ADHD.
Because
So
we've both started in the
let's
past
go.
year, right? We've both started in the past year, and we
Yeah.
want to share basically why it's freaking amazing and how much
Yeah,
difference
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
makes. So, Addy, how's it gone? Like, is it good? Is it good? What would you
I
say?
mean, yeah, so far it's been pretty good, I would say. I have done a little bit in the past, but only I think I got like 6 sessions previously on my benefits, and so that was back when I was going through a difficult breakup. And so that was kind of like the main focus of therapy for me back then, and my anxiety. And he focused a lot on like helping me deal with my anxiety. Um, and then I started last year mostly in grief counseling, just because my dad passed away almost a year ago, and that for me was a great way to process my grief, was to have someone to talk to who was like a dedicated space to do that, and it was also good because those things can't be separated. Like my grief and my ADHD and my anxiety was like to try and understand like where certain feelings were coming from. Is this coming from my grief? Is this coming from my ADHD? And like trying to work out like what was causing certain feelings to come up. And then I have recently moved to a new therapist a few months ago, and she's great. Like I love her. We just had a session yesterday where I'm just like every time I cry, and she's always like, "What's this feeling coming up?" And I'm like, I'm just crying. I cry all the time.
It's good to cry. That's something I learned hardcore.
Yeah, it is.
Like every emotion there's
Um,
no good or bad emotion. It just inform us what our
yes,
what our
yes, exactly.
conditioning
That's
is.
actually something we were talking about.
Yes. Yeah, and I think the
That
difference in that is the difference between catastrophizing and making it worse, like reacting to the emotion negatively and reacting to the emotion like, okay, I see you, baby me inside. I love you.
mm,
And that difference is
mm-hmm.
like 3 days of sadness or one day, I'd say, to
Yeah,
me.
or like 1 hour. Like you start learning how to notice these feelings and recognize them, acknowledge them, not trying to push them down, because when you push them down, they just come back with more force,
Mm.
right? And also understand like where they're coming from, what might be triggering this, and that like good and bad emotions are both valid, right? And like to give them space and hold space for them, and how important that is.
Yeah, I feel like managing ADHD is a lot like managing a little kid that's inside you. You know, like sometimes
Mm-hmm.
they'll feel angry and sometimes they'll feel sad. And if you just say to that kid, get lost, you stupid kid, I hate you, aka not feeling your emotions, then that kid will scream twice as loud and rage twice as loud. Because
Mm-hmm.
what does that, like you learnt that, like you got that imprint, like
Mm-hmm.
long ago. And I think that if when that inner core you, that like limbic reptilian you is raging, what you need to talk to it like it's a younger you that is frustrated. And how should a loving parent talk to that kid? And
Yeah,
so now
yeah,
when I feel angry,
and
I take time to feel it, which
yeah.
I never did before.
So I think for me that one of the biggest benefits of having a therapist is just having a space to talk about things that are on your mind that you might be having like certain strong feelings about, without necessarily having to like offload those things on your partner or on your friends, and just having a dedicated time where you're like, oh, I know that this is where I can talk about like those things, because otherwise they don't get out, right?
Yeah, and they stay in us, ready to bubble up.
Them all on our partner.
I feel like if we don't process our emotions, they're just waiting on the sidelines, ready for anything. Like, those times when you're really tense and anxious all the time, and you don't know what's going on. I feel like now I can recognize that as, oh, I'm really high on the polyvagal arousal scale. I can tell that I'm super reactive right now. So I know, therefore, I recognize those feelings because I've labeled them as like, oh, I'm in flight, fright, freeze, or fawn, right? I recognize that. Yeah. Now I can, what do I need to do? I need to regulate down. And so I can activate those protocols, like exhaling super slow after a big breath, or I'm squeezing my hands, or squeezing some clay, or I'm doing box breathing, 4 in, hold 4 out. Like, now I think just learning these tools and knowing what to do makes such a difference, because it's so easy to be in like an anxious spiral when we have ADHD, and I definitely know what that feels like.
Yeah. So there's a lot of benefits to therapy, just having that space to talk, learning these coping mechanisms, learning to recognize your emotions and break thinking patterns that we might have. But how do you find a therapist? Like, I think the first part of finding a therapist is figuring out what kind of therapy will work for you, because actually there's like a whole plethora of different kinds of therapy. I think the one that most people are aware of and that is most well known for helping ADHD and anxiety is CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's where you help identify thought patterns and then try and break or change those thought and behavior patterns. There's dialectical behavior therapy, which is where you use certain stimuli to like redirect your eyes during thought patterns or certain moments of stress. So that's more common in like BPD and PTSD, I believe. But I'm not sure exactly how it works with ADHD, because we also have some of those like strong emotions that potentially could be beneficial. And then there's like systemic therapy that goes and like looks at your whole family group and how everyone interacts, and they analyze like, okay, so yeah, these issues are potentially coming from like this relationship, and then that relationship needs work. And so there's different benefits to all these like different kinds of therapy.
Isn't that what they call? Is that known as internal family systems? Because I've known that is very effective for healing ADHD, or like helping with ADHD. Yeah, and also I wanted to say, if you feel like you have a kind of like if you feel like you had like the overlap between ADHD and a trauma is so big, and it definitely exacerbates those intense emotions and a dysregulated nervous system. If you feel like you have had, maybe a rough childhood, or maybe you had to raise yourself, or maybe you had an emotionally reactive parent, which is definitely the case in ADHD families because it's genetic, then you can look into trauma-informed therapist, because or somatic, a somatic-based healer, which is basically means feeling inside, because when you have had an intense childhood, or you were always on edge, or you've had any period of stress or any trauma, you're always on edge, right? And you've got all these emotions floating around inside. And typically when we have an emotion that's too intense to digest, we disconnect our mind from our body, and we stop feeling those physical sensations inside that help us navigate our internal state and our emotions. So that's why they double the volume and randomly pop out, because we're not feeling inside. And that's called, if you're interested in that, check out Somatic Experiencing, or Peter Levine's work. He wrote a book called Awaking the Tiger, which I think is the best book on this subject, or anything by Gabor, because he's a fucking legend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you're searching for a therapist, there's different platforms. We're not sponsored, but I've heard of BetterHelp. Some people use that. You can just like Google like therapists in my area, and some places have a registry. So I think here in Vancouver, they have like a registry, so you can look for that, and you can search for things like ADHD, anxiety, trauma informed, substance abuse. So like you can search for the specific issues that you are looking to get help with, because they have found that dealing with a therapist who has similar life experiences as well can be really beneficial. So like my partner and I are non-monogamous, so we were looking up like LGBT and polyamorous informed counselors, because you want someone who is either part of that world and understands how that world works, or at least is sympathetic to it. I mean, all therapists should be sympathetic, but you never know, you might end up going to like a Christian counselor who is like judgmental of LGBT community. You don't want that, right? If you're gay. So
Yeah.
That's important in finding a therapist, is like making sure that they are informed in like your life experience world, so that they can better help you, basically.
Yeah, and it's okay to bounce around too. Like if you don't get on with a therapist, or if you don't believe that they're really genuinely want to help you, then it may be awkward, but it's just worth it to find someone that you really have rapport with. Because and it's fine. Like I think therapists are fine if you don't vibe with them at first. And on BetterHelp, I know, and we're not sponsored by them, but I know you can bounce around super easily, and it takes 45 minutes or something, lol. And we're really not sponsored by them.
Yeah, and some therapists, like the one I'm with now, that clinic actually did an intake call, and then you have your like initial intake call for like 10-20 minutes with your potential therapist to see if you're a good match. Not all places will do that, but that's a good option if you're able to have that, just to like check that you gel with the person, because that's important. You like want to have a good rapport with your therapist. And you can fire them. Like you are hiring your therapist, and most of the time you are paying for them, unless it's like assigned through your doctor. So you can
like
fire
if you're
them.
hiring a plumber,
if you need to.
If you're hiring a plumber and they were like judgmental of you, they were like, "Wow, your floor's really dirty," you would just get a new plumber, right? I guess like that comes first, especially with talking to a person. But I just remembered, right, that there's a saying which goes something like, you can read 1,000 books and it's not as valuable as talking to a wise person for 5 minutes. And I think that's what it's like having a therapist. They can observe you and tell you the exact things that will make the most difference to you. And I think that's why everyone should have a therapist.
Yeah,
Because,
and
like,
they are noticing patterns in how you speak, or like certain things that come up. Like the way my therapist phrases things is, she's like, "Oh, I noticed that this feeling came up, where I noticed that you like tapped yourself and you did like self-soothing when you talked about this." And you have like this outside view that you maybe didn't even know you were doing that. You're like, "Oh, I didn't know. I was like cradling myself when I talked about my mom." Like,
and they know the questions to ask. Like, it's funny how they can say hardly anything, but they are saying everything for you in that one sentence. They're like, "So, what did they say to you?" Or like, "What did that feel like? And what does that feel like inside?" Like those kind of questions. I was like, "Whoa, that unfolds."
I know. And it's like, actually a good therapist is not telling you what you should do. Rarely are they doing that. They might give you like some suggestions, like, "Oh, maybe you can try box breathing or something like this." But they're rarely telling you like, "You are broken and this is what's wrong with you." They're actually getting you to investigate for yourself, like, and question certain things that you're doing, and certain reactions that you're having.
How do you feel like after therapy? Sometimes it's very emotionally intense. Do you feel sometimes a little bit afterwards like you need some time alone to process?
Yeah, for sure. Like, especially for me, after grief therapy, I found that I was like, "Oh, if I have grief counseling today, like I probably am like not good for the rest of the day. And that was like when I was like really deep in my grief, I would say. But yeah, sometimes I just need like some time to decompress or like, you know, have some space alone after I've maybe touched on some strong feelings.
Because I really didn't know how important that was, like the integration process. Like, I think a lot of the time I was kind of, like in a good way, very mind blown, and I'd have to re-look at my whole life. You know, like, oh, that wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
I was in a delusion of inadequacy my whole life. Oh my God. You mean I'm more capable than I ever knew? That was such a big one. I was like, oh my God, I've been living in a trance my whole life. God damn, I need to rewrite my whole life story. Oh, you mean I don't have to feel guilt about every single thing when when I don't feel like I can do it? Great, thanks for that, mate. And that's the kind of insights you get from therapy that I think you're just priceless. Even if you have to pay sometimes, like I've had to pay for a few sessions, and damn, you know, they can be pricey, but I think that is worth like 100 books. That one piece of knowledge changed my outlook on my whole life, changed my outlook on how I felt about myself for the better.
And it's also worth
that money.
Searching in your area for low-cost therapists. So I just Googled low-cost therapy because I don't have money right now, basically. But I was like, I still need to be in therapy because trust issues are coming up in my life.
Great.
And I found a clinic, and they were able to offer me a like significantly reduced rate on my sessions, and it was supposed to be like a 6-month wait, but they got me in like 2 weeks or something, like way less than I expected. So it's worth looking for. I know that in some places, like in the US, my friend said even with her insurance, like that would cover the cost of it, it's like a crazy wait time to even get in to talk to a therapist. So I know not everyone has that benefit of like, oh, you can go and see someone like next week. But yeah, just like look around in your area or like online. A lot of like we mentioned again, it's just because everyone is sponsored by them, but we're not. Please help us. But BetterHelp is like one of those options for people who like want online.
Or maybe even if you don't,
like more accessible.
So let's say you don't have the money, you don't have any options in your area. What do you do then? Maybe there are community support groups for ADHDers in your area. Maybe there is some, like, I don't know, some meditation groups or yoga groups where people are used to feeling inside their body and healing in that way. And you get wise people there. Even if you can talk to people openly and honest, especially wise people, you want like people who feel like they've got their life together and know what's up. If there is no other option, that is. Because I think that, like, I think a lot of the time with ADHD, we think it's all self-help. We think we're on this journey kind of alone. Even self-love, it sounds like it's all just you trying to love yourself. But actually, healing comes from community. Limbic, this raw core part of our brain that like is so connected to the amygdala, you know, all of these parts of our brain that really mess up our groove is all connected with how we are relating to people, how we're connecting to people. So if you can find people that you can connect to, and maybe compassionate people with big hearts, I think those people can provide a space. And obviously ask them, don't just dump. I think it's important to be like, is it okay if I share some stuff with you? And it could be heavy stuff and it could contain a lot of emotions, but I really need the space and someone to hold space and allow me to just speak. If they can actively listen, I think that's the key skill, is if they can. Active listening is where you listen without really saying anything in return, but you're just encouraging that person to talk. Because there's been some times where I've come home and I've listened to my mum talk for 4 hours at a time, and I don't recommend this to anyone, but like there was a time in my life where I'd done loads of meditation and I had all these insights about how to lead my life, and I used to try and force them on my mum, and obviously she wasn't receptive to that. Like no one's receptive if you just rant at them, right? But I changed tactics and just listened to her for 4 hours. Like I didn't say anything. I just was like, yep, and then what, and yep. And by the end of that 4-hour session, she was coming out with all of these insights and wise insights into her life that I don't think she would have had otherwise, because she just needed to be heard. It crystallizes your brain together, right? Doesn't it? It has all these random bits of knowledge that we can't put in perspective, but by wording them out, they suddenly all make sense. And so, yeah, if you have no other option, I highly recommend finding someone that can hold that space.
Yeah,
it helps.
And
helps.
we have a Discord for the ADHDers community, and we have like event space. So like one of the channels is a place where people can come and they could just like write out like what's on their mind and write whether or not they even want a response, because sometimes it's just that like process of getting something out. But then we also have like the main chat where people go on and they like discuss relationships, or like they discuss all these different aspects of our lives and get responses from people on like how to manage that. So if you're feeling like Patreon, that's something that you might need, so you can join through Patreon and get access to the Discord, where you have a whole community of people who understand better your experiences. So that's a bit more of an accessible way to get. It's not therapy. Just put that out there. It's definitely not actual therapy, but at least have something of a community. To
I think community helps a lot.
Some of the things.
Like I think Reddit is a great place, but like the ADHD Reddit is so full of people who, you know, in the ADHD community, you get a lot of people who are like, who make their situation worse in a way. Like I think everyone needs to be heard, but that's why we made ADHDers, is because we want to be like, okay, this is a situation, what do I do? Rather than this is the situation, freak out, la la la. And that's easy to do. And I think it's good to share the reality of your feelings, but I think that it can be a kind of cycle on the ADHD Reddit. But if not on there, I think even that ADHD Reddit is really helpful in lots of other ways. But check out reddit.com/u/CPTSD, because that has a massive overlap with ADHD, of people who have had intense stresses in their life and have intense emotion. And that is very helpful community. And actually, there's an amazing subreddit that I'd really recommend called CPTSD Next Steps. And it's full of healing resources for people who have flickering attention, have intense emotional dysregulation. So it's called CPTSD Next Steps Reddit. You can Google that. That would be great.
Cool.
I bet that a lot of people
get
help.
So I think that's kind of our like cliff notes on therapy, and how we found it good, how you can like start looking into finding a therapist. Obviously it's different in every country. I think maybe some places you need to get a referral from your doctor, but just start doing some Googling, start that rabbit hole thread on therapy, and get interested in it if you haven't yet. And like look out for yourself, your mental health. We love you so much, and
we love you.
We thank you so much for listening.
And well done.
Catch us on the next episode.
Check out our ADHDers.com for amazing resources that are pay as you feel, because we just want to help the people, and rate this podcast good and send it to people that would find it useful. If maybe there's someone you know who's like, oh, therapy's rubbish, then send this to them. And other than that, keep loving yourself and keep kicking ass. Love ya. Keep ADHD doing.
Bye.
Bye.